Hello, I'm Jeremy, and today we're going to be talking about a game by the name of Framework. This is a German edition of the game. It's designed by Uwe Rosenberg. It's a tile-laying puzzle game for 1 to 4 players. I believe that it is being published imminently in English-speaking countries, but the components don't have any language dependencies, and there are English rules for this online, so I felt fine importing it. The game is essentially a individual tableau builder where players are going to be drafting tiles, putting them down in front of them, trying to meet requirements of adjacencies, color adjacencies, to be the first one to play out all their scoring markers. So it's a bit of a race, a little of a puzzle and a bit of a race. It's similar to some games that the designer, Uwe Rosenberg, has made before. Sagani and also Nova Luna were two games that I say directly preceded this one. I'm going to take a few minutes to show you how it plays, and then I'll discuss the differences between that and the other games and give you my thoughts on it. Framework is a puzzle game for 2 to 4 players, and I've set up here a 2-player game a few rounds in to help demonstrate the game. And in the game, players are going to be drafting these tiles. They're essentially all of the same sort. There's going to be a frame on each tile, well, most tiles, as well as a requirement on each tile, and this basically will require a certain number of connected frames of the color that's shown in your grid to score it. And each player is going to get, I think, 20 of these little scoring discs, and these are round scoring discs, so they'll roll everywhere. I wish they had made those cubes, but in any case, each player will get same number of those discs, and then starting with the start player, they'll draw out one more tile than the number of players. The start player will take one, add it to their display. Every other player going around will take one, add it to their display. The one that's left, then the start player will have to take and add to their display. They have to do that after they've already placed their first one. So they have to place their first one before the other players essentially draft. So they have to place their first one without knowing what the last one is they're going to get. And then the bag will pass to the next player. They'll become the start player, and you'll repeat. So the way that the game goes is you're going to be, like I said, drafting these tiles, adding them to your display, and what you're trying to do is meet these scoring requirements on the tiles. So, for example, this tile here has 2 scoring requirements. It wants 4 connected yellow frames next to it, or it wants 7, and you could score both of those using the same frame. So, like, once you score the 4, you're already most of the way to your 7. And what that would mean is, let's say this player took this one and put it here, you could see it's next to a yellow frame tile, and that means that would be one of the 4 that it needs to be next to. And the adjacency rules work in this game that when you're counting adjacencies, you could count through any tile that has a yellow frame on it when you're determining your adjacency. So let me just borrow this one for a second. So if this was the case, this tile here is considered to be adjacent to 1, 2 yellow tiles. So the adjacencies could be traced through other tiles as long as you don't break your chain of yellow frames. Some of them will have more than 1 yellow frame and whatnot, and those will count more towards it. At any time, if you realize that you've scored one of the conditions on your board, you'll simply put a marker on it. So let's say it's this player's turn, and I can see that they have a scoring opportunity. So you can see here they're taking this red frame with a 3 yellow requirement on it, and if they put that here, they have this 3 red requirement here, and they have 1, 2, 3 red, which are basically connected or connected through other red frame tiles, so they would be able to place the score marker covering up that. And you can see here in this player's instance, they have here a 4 red, so as soon as they add 1 more red adjacent to any of these, or on the other side here, they'd be able to score that. And they also have a 5 red here, so that will just keep building upon itself. The way the game goes, you're generally not going to you'll have to pick your battles determining which of these various things you're going to be able to score, because once you cut off a tile on all 4 sides, certain things aren't going to be able to be scored. But in any case, this player would then take this tile, and maybe they would add it to their display somewhere like this, extending their yellow chain. And then, like I said, the bag would pass, 3 more tiles would be drawn out because it's a 2-player game, and then this player here would end up taking the first and last tile. And the game is really that simple. It just keeps going back and forth with players scoring the various tiles until somebody has placed the last of their marker, and then the game will end immediately when that happens. So there are a few other things I'll show you on the tiles. There's a couple different types of scoring. So like I said, these are just the basic ones. It just needs 1 color to be scored, and like I said, the ones that you use to score your 6 could also score your 8. there are ones that show something like this, which is you need either 3 grays or 3 yellows. So you can't, not a mix and match. Essentially, either 3 grays or 3 yellows would satisfy the requirement for that. But again, it couldn't be mixed and matched. And I don't see an example of the other one, but there is one that does mix and match it. And the iconography on that is slightly subpar, I would say. I should probably show you that just to so you can see what I'm talking about. So here, this one, any mix of green and yellow adjacent tiles would satisfy this requirement. You see that it basically is 2 colored without a slash. This one has a slash going diagonally across. So this means all of your requirements have to be 1 color. This could be a mix of those 2 colors. So that might be a little bit confusing, I guess. And then the last type really are these here, which show basically 2 requirements, and you have to complete the brown 6 before you could complete the green 1. And I think those are really all the types of tiles in the game. It's a really simple game, and like I said, it's really just a race to be the first one to place all of your tiles onto your board. If the bag of tiles happens to run out, though, then the winner will simply be the person who's placed more of them at that point. Alright, so that is Framework, and as you can see, it's a really simple family weight game. The game plays in about 30 minutes or so, probably plays a little quicker if you have fewer players, a little bit longer if you have more players, but most players are thinking simultaneously about where they're going to add their tiles to their grid, so it doesn't really stretch out when you have more players. I should mention that there is a solo mode, which I have not tried, but essentially you're competing against your own score to see how compressed a grid, basically, if you could fit your tiles within a 5x5 grid before you place all of your scoring markers. You get essentially a perfect score. Every time you go beyond a 5x5 grid, you're going to essentially have a negative point, and you're trying to compress your tiles yet still achieve your score as quickly as possible. So it's very similar rules. It basically has much the same gameplay as the other version of the game, the multiplayer version of the game, but it is just a solo game. So as far as the multiplayer version of the game, which I have played now several times, I find that this one is, compared to the other games in the series, so Nova Luna, which is a relatively famous game, Spiel des Jahres nominated, and then Sagani, which is a similar game, except that sometimes you'll be looking for instead of having direct adjacencies, you're looking for tiles to satisfy a requirement along a given line, so including a diagonal line somewhere within your grid. You're trying to meet requirements like that. But it has a similar idea where you're going to be drafting tiles, adding them to a personal display. And both of these games, or all 3 of these games, I suppose, have their antecedent in a game by the name of Habitats, which is designed by Corne van Moorsel, who is a Belgian designer, I believe, and he collaborated with Uwe Rosenberg on Nova Luna. And just because essentially the way that this game traces adjacencies when determining adjacencies through like tiles is really pulled back from that. And that's a game with a zoo theme. It was recently they had a Kickstarter for it. It's coming back into print. It was originally a relatively small print run game. I believe Board Game Tables is going to be putting out a new version of that. But in any case, all of these various versions of this same system have really been progressively, I think, getting simpler, and this is the simplest of them. And for me, it's probably my least favorite of them, but that doesn't mean in any way it's really a bad game. I think any family would enjoy the puzzle of this and whatnot. The disappointments for this one for me are a couple things. First of all, the graphic design. I touched upon that a little bit. I find that the brown and the red colors, although I don't have any sort of color blindness, are a little bit similar until you point out to people that there are different drawings, like the reds are bricks and the browns are wood, and that could help people tell them apart. If you're not playing in a super well lit area, those 2 colors kind of look the same, especially on the scoring requirement part of the tiles. And I think that's a mistake that they could have easily avoided by just picking another color. Also, something that I find less than exciting about this version of the game is the way that the tiles are drafted. Essentially, each player is going to get 1, except for the star player, they'll get first and last pick. And I suppose that's fine. It's just not as exciting as the tile draft in the other games previous in the series. So, Habitats essentially you had a little animal meeple that you moved around in a grid, and you could take the tile to your left, the tile to your right, and the tile in front of you, and there was some blocking involved. If players got in your way, it would reduce your choices. That was like a gamery version of the tile draft, and Nova Luna had essentially a time track. So tiles had a cost depending on how powerful they were, and if you took a more powerful tile, you had to go further on the time track, and the player who was furthest behind on the time track would be the next player. And so it's very similar to Rosenberg's game Patchwork, so that I thought worked well. And then Sagani was similar to this, but it had some things. If people passed on a tile, they would go into an overflow area, and then everybody would get an extra tile, and that just had a few extra rules. I feel like this is an example of the publisher trying to distill this down as far as possible, and I think in doing that they've made it, the game says ages 8+. They've made it a good family game, but maybe one that I would not choose to play, given that there's 3 other games in the series that are slightly more thinky, slightly more complex, which is more to my personal taste. None of them is, I think, a real heavy game in any regard. So it's really just degrees of difference. And I would say that, because of those graphic design issues, because of the simplicity of this one, unless you're really looking for the lightest version of this, I would definitely recommend maybe Nova Luna above this one, which I think the time aspect of this adds a little bit of tension to it. That's the most similar, or maybe waiting for the reprint of Habitats to come out, because that's just a far more interesting and maybe even more thematic version of this system. So again, those are my thoughts on Framework. It's basically not in any way a bad game. It's just essentially the worst iteration of a game that's seeing within the last 5 years or so, its 4th iteration. So unless you're looking for a very easy, very approachable, very rules light family game, there's probably going to be some better choices from these same designers. So those are my thoughts.